So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome once again. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar this afternoon. It's called Dreaming from a Place of Lament, and that's what we're going to be reflecting on and learning about this afternoon. My name is Joseph Ola. I'm one of the lecturers and the tutors on the Pioneer Mission Training team of Church Mission Society in Oxford, and I'll be hosting and moderating our time together for this afternoon. We're really glad that you could join us. I did say for those of us that joined a bit earlier that just a couple of practicalities. One, it's a Zoom webinar, it's not a Zoom meeting, and so you won't see all the people that are joining in from different places, but you get to engage with one another and with the speakers on the chat thread. There is a dedicated Q&A box on the chat thread that you can also use to specifically leave your questions. That way it's easier to track those questions when it's time to bring them up to our guest speaker for this particular webinar. Let me just say a couple of words about Church Mission Society and specifically as well about the Pioneer Mission Training that is hosting this conversation and this space that we are sharing together. Of course, when we look at the life of Jesus, we think of how he consistently spends time with people at the edges, with the tax collectors, with the people that will be deemed as sinners in the context of his day, those on the edges of society, on the edges of religious life. As an organization, Church Mission Society, we seek to follow in those steps of Jesus by also connecting with people at the edges of church, at the edges of society, and to join in what God is doing in bringing renewal and restoration to the world. And one of the ways we do that is through the Pioneer Mission Training. That's the theological education arm, if you will, of the Church Mission Society. And our students are people who sense the call of God to venture into ministry in contexts that are pioneering in all sorts of ways, going into the edges of society, of communities, of cultures. In that sense, our programs are accredited by Durham University, and our speaker this afternoon is coming from that context as well. Our speaker is Canon Dr. Cathy Ross. Cathy Ross is a lecturer and a tutor also in the CMS Pioneer Mission Training, and also a lecturer in mission at Regent's Park College in Oxford. She has previously led the Pioneer Mission Training team for over 5 years, going to 6 years, from 2019 to 2025. And before that, she served as the General Secretary of the International Association for Mission Studies. Cathy has worked extensively in Rwanda, in Congo, in Uganda, with the New Zealand Church Mission Society, and today she serves as the Canon Theologian at Leicester Cathedral. Her research is mainly into issues around contextual theologies, world Christianity, feminist theologies, and hospitality. But today she will be helping us to think about lament. Lament not simply as something associated with Lent, but something deeply biblical, a practice that is transformative, really, to say the least. And we look forward to the time that we're going to spend together with her. Cathy, thank you for being with us today, and over to you.
Thank you, Joseph, and thank you for your introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me share my screen so that you can see what we're doing today. I'm hoping that you can see that, dreaming from a place of lament. There are things that can be seen only with eyes that have cried. So I guess when we think about our current context, lament seems a very appropriate thing to be reflecting on and dwelling on. I think especially since COVID, our world has changed. Many of us are tired, and change and uncertainty can be exhausting, can't it? And if we think of our current context with the wars, the injustice, the trauma, the human suffering, and so much change and uncertainty on a global level as well as a personal level, lament is indeed very appropriate. So I want to think about this today with the help of a couple of scholars. And one scholar who is particularly beloved by our students at CMS is Walter Brueggemann, who died recently. He's particularly appreciated amongst our students for his book on prophetic imagination. But I listened to a podcast with him recently, before he died, and he was talking about change. And this is what he had to say about change, which I think is very helpful. So he says, I think we think of systems and continuities and predictability in schemes and plans. I think the Bible is to some great extent focused on God's capacity to break those schemes open and to violate those formulae. When they're positive disruptions, the Bible calls them miracles. We tend not to use that word when they're negative, but what it means is that the reality of our life and the reality of God are not contained in most of our explanatory schemes. And so he draws on the biblical language of lament to help us to name and face some of these crises and disruptions, and then to find hope. As we name and face our situation, mourn and grieve the current realities of war and injustice and all the terrible suffering and pain, and sit with it and not rush on, then perhaps we can begin too tentatively to find hope. Another scholar that has written powerfully on the themes of lament, again a scholar that we use a lot at CMS in our training, is Roman Catholic Ugandan theologian Emmanuel Katongole. He wrote this book several years ago, Born from Lament, The Theology and Politics of Hope in Africa. And in that book, he writes that he believes that in the face of such pain and trauma, the church in Africa, and indeed everywhere, needs to learn how to lament. So with his insights and a very striking example from Burundi, and also bringing in a former student later on, Paul Latham, I would like to consider lament in the following ways, which I've grouped as lament as articulation and complaint, lament as resistance, justice and innovation, and finally lament as newness and hope. But firstly, just to set some context, Katongole reminds us that for Israel, and how prophetic and prescient is this, he reminds us that for Israel, their safety and security are not found in military might and strength, nor in wealth or cybersecurity, but in their covenant relationship with God, with Yahweh. The Israelites praised God, but they also protested at God. They railed against injustice and they pressed God for deliverance. We see this especially in the Psalms. You probably know this. Of the 150 Psalms, 60 of them, around 40%, are Psalms of lament. That makes it the biggest single category. There are Psalms of praise, there are Psalms of thanksgiving, royal Psalms, but the largest category are the Psalms of lament. So this meant that at the core of Israel's life, their social, religious, and community life was framed by lament. Now, there's a generally recognized structure to the Psalms of Lament with 5 elements: articulation, complaint, request, motivation, and confidence. Let's have a look at Psalm 13 as an example. How long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. And my enemy will say, I have prevailed. My foes will rejoice because I am shaken. But I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. So these elements of address, complaint, request, motivation and finding confidence do vary. They're not found in all psalms of lament, but they do signify a kind of turning to God, and they reflect a deep intimacy with God. And another important facet we notice is that lament often moves into praise. The laments and songs of thanksgiving belong together in Israel's worship. They have the confidence to express the entire range of human emotions before God: doubt and faith, sorrow and joy, fear and trust, life and death. Such is the confidence born out of this covenant relationship, and a sign of the depth of their relationship with a loving God. After all, what kind of relationship is it if we can only express our joy and faith and not our need, our sorrows, our pain, our trauma, our complaints even? So lament as articulation and complaint. You might have noticed that the first cry in Psalm 13 is, "How long, O God?" Lamentations begins with a visceral cry, ika, a cry of pain. A cry of pain and complaint is a key component of lament. Expressions of complaint in the Psalms range from expressions of concern to utter desperation in the face of illness, before one's enemies, or protestations of innocence. Maybe you think that to complain is risky, or perhaps it seems almost improper. But really, I think it shows that the relationship with God is alive, dynamic, open. It refuses to accept things the way they are. It protests God's silence and presses God for deliverance. And this requires courage to protest in this way against God, but we see it again and again in the Psalms and in prophets such as Jeremiah. And ultimately, it may also be a way forward into newness. In the Psalms of Lament, while the writers draw on memories of God's saving actions in the past, there is always the risk and possibility that God will act in totally new ways as a result of the present suffering. So we may see and learn something totally new and unexpected about God. And it suggests that Israel understood complaint as an essential part of their relationship with God. Gotongole believes that it is not those who lack faith who complain, but those recognized for strong faith who bring their most honest and passionate feelings to God. It ensures that the relationship is alive, dynamic, negotiated, contested. It is also risky. Complaint is a form of protest. It refuses to accept things the way they are. As I said, it presses God for deliverance. Perhaps it even challenges God. But sometimes it seems that God remains silent. However, perhaps God's silence allows space for human speech, for touch and human healing. Old Testament scholar Kathleen O'Connor, writing on the Book of Lamentations, notes that God's silence in Lamentations leaves wounds festering, open to the air, and possible to healing. The benefit of exposed wounds is that they become visible and unavoidable. Left exposed, they require us to see, acknowledge, and attend to them. She also believes that the silence of God is inspired and that its haunting power lies in its brutal honesty. God's frightening silence is resonant with interpretive possibility. It makes of the poetry a haven for voices of pain, and it prevents us from sliding prematurely over suffering towards happy endings. In contrast to silence, the African American gospel songs, those spirituals, are a powerful expression of their belief that God was with them in their suffering. And did you know that the protesters against ICE in Minnesota, many of them before they protested, met in churches all around the city, and they would sing together for an hour before they went out to protest. And so in this way, it gave them courage and community and connection before they went out protesting. And these African American gospel songs, they're such a powerful expression of their belief that God was with them in their suffering even while they were living in this whirling vortex of God-forsakenness. Those spirituals are drenched in pain and sadness, but they also express such a strong, vibrant spirit of resistance and confidence and hope. And what gave them this confidence partly was the Exodus story, that ultimately God would save or rescue them, and also their identification of their own suffering with that of Christ's forsakenness on the cross. And ultimately, as Martin Luther King has reminded us, it was those spirituals that gave birth to the freedom songs of the American Civil Rights Movement. So what about us? How do we engage with lament? Brueggemann and others have highlighted the absence of lament in our churches. And Brueggemann concludes that a community of faith which negates lament soon concludes that the hard issues of justice are improper questions to pose at the throne, because the throne seems only to be a place of praise. I believe it thus follows that if justice questions are improper questions at the throne, they soon appear to be improper questions in public places, in schools, in hospitals, with the government, and eventually even in the courts. Justice questions disappear into civility and docility. So a loss of lament can then signify a loss of passion for social justice. So moving on to lament as resistance, justice, and innovation. Lament can indeed be a form of resistance and can ultimately bring about justice, newness, and hope. We've already noted that the African American spirituals are a form of resistance, and lament can also be a form of agency. A cry of anguish is not only a way of naming and mourning what is lost, but it's also a way of standing in the midst of suffering. And so lament deepens our engagement with the world of suffering, and it invites us into a more active social and political engagement. So I want to show you now a short video. It's a 7-minute video of a woman named Maggie Barankize, who was involved in the 1993 genocide in Burundi, the neighboring country to Rwanda. So this is not the 94 genocide in Rwanda, it's about the 1993 one that occurred in Burundi. So I warn you, this is tough listening. The viewing perhaps not so much, but it is tough to hear and reflect on what went on. So if you have children with you, you might like to think that this may not be quite appropriate for them. But listen to Maggie's story, and then there she is, and then we'll have some reflection on it.
She calls it Maison Shalom. It's here in the Burundian village of Ruwigi that Maggie Barankize has transformed the lives of 30,000 orphans. Maggie has rejected Burundi's past of ethnic hatred, poverty, and genocide. Instead, she's writing a new story. She's created a place where children can be raised in a vision of love and God's abundance. Maison Shalom now includes a farm, hospital, movie theater, swimming pool, and mechanics shop, among other businesses.
We Christian, our duty, it's not to go every day in the church and praying, and then it's to give back the dignity to the human person, because all the project is surrounding this human person. Yes, we can give clothes, we can feed the person, but if he has no dignity, it's not.
It began at the start of Burundi's civil war. Maggie, an ethnic Tutsi, was working as a secretary at the Catholic bishop's house in Ruwigi. She had adopted 7 children, 4 Hutus and 3 Tutsis. In October 1993, Tutsi assailants attacked the compound. Maggie was stripped naked and tied up. 72 Hutus were killed before her eyes, including priests and nuns. One was her best friend, Juliet.
My friend Juliet looked at me and said, "Please, educate my children, Lydia and Lisette, like your own children. Give them the love, but I prefer to die with my husband. And then they cut the head and they give me.
Maggie's 7 adopted children survived, and she managed to save another 25 children as well. But she didn't stop there. This horrific experience was the start of Maggie's calling, not just to save children, but to proclaim the gospel message of love by raising a new generation without the hatred and bitterness she already saw growing in their eyes.
Every day I improvise new life because love makes us inventor.
Emmanuel Kotongole is a Catholic priest and professor at Duke Divinity School. He's the author of The Sacrifice of Africa, a book about Christian leaders in Africa, including Maggie.
Maggie says, love has made me an inventor. But in order to understand what she says and what she means by love has made me an inventor, you need to go back a little and discover that for Maggie, love is her true identity. She is, in a way, entering into that story of love and kind of allowing that story to, if you like, explode from within in order to show what it means. That's what she says. Love has made me an inventor. Kind of living within that story of love in a way allows me to invent a new future. So being an inventor is about inventing a new future of being God's beloved.
But Maggie's calling was to do more than just protect children. 18 years after that terrible day, Maison Shalom is thriving. With Maggie as the visionary catalyst, Maison Shalom is building an enduring and sustainable institution. Maison Shalom challenges the notion that Burundi is a poor country. It challenges the idea that Burundi's 600,000 orphans cannot thrive, that hatred and ethnic divisions must continue.
It's so stupid to hate the others because they are different than us, because it's harmony. To see Hutu and Tutsi together, Congolese, other white person, God wants to make, it's so beautiful to see those differences become richness.
Maggie insists that the people of Burundi can live full, rich lives. This includes entertainment, such as watching movies and swimming.
When they ask me, you want to make a cinema in Ruigi where is a war and they will destroy everything? And why a cinema and a swimming pool? And I said, why you must always give us clothes and so we can dream like you.
Maison Shalom now comprises many businesses, including a mechanics school, a tailor's shop, and a hair salon.
You see, to dream also, not only to, you can sit and they will cut your...
All are part of the vision. The enterprises generate income and make Maison Shalom sustainable, but they also carry a powerful theological message. The swimming pool isn't just a place for the children to have fun. It's a symbol of the waters of baptism built on a killing field.
And then where I have found many bodies, because I am Christian, I said I will put a swimming pool in, because of the water of our baptized, clean all the sin.
Maison Shalom also includes a morgue. In a nation where killing has become routine, families now have a place to honor their dead.
For this dignity, I must give opportunity to the family to cry.
There's an area for celebrating and feasting. In the midst of so much death, this space speaks to the hope of resurrection.
We never die, really, because we go, our mission on here is finished. We continue another because we are created for eternity.
Maggie is sharing her vision beyond Ruigi and even Burundi. Maison Shalom is a demonstration plot of hope. Her work has been recognized with the Opus Prize, a faith-based humanitarian award for social innovation.
Maggie wants to ferment, if you like, a revolution. She calls it a revolution of love. And so it's quite ambitious. She wants a revolution, not only in Ruigi, in Burundi, beyond Burundi, to the whole world, a revolution of love.
My dream is to build all over the world Shalom House to say we are only one family. And it's my dream, like John Lennon in his song, Imagine. This is life.
Under Maggie's leadership, Maison Shalom has become a place of hope, joy, and a new community.
What an amazing story and an amazing woman. There are some important things to note about Maggie in the context of lament. After the massacre, she experienced an incredible energy, determination, and anger, all of which she turned into setting up Maison Shalom. But the key driver for her was love. She operates out of an excess of love, which is a basic theological principle for her. It was love that made her an innovator. She claims, love made me an inventor. I love that phrase. Love made me an inventor. And in the face of all this trauma, she improvised and innovated so that the children could survive, not only survive, but flourish. She invented a new community, not just a tribal community, but a community beyond tribalism. And she came up with very practical ideas for the children. Her love was deepened through her grief and lament. There is something about pain and suffering that is at the heart of lament. There are things that can be seen only with eyes that have cried. This was said by Roman Catholic Archbishop Christopher Mozihira. He was the Archbishop of Bukavu in Congo from 1994 to 1996. In the midst of the civil war there in Eastern Congo, he worked for peace and he was building structures of justice, forgiveness, and love. He really was a prophet for a new vision of society, but after 2 short years as Archbishop, he was assassinated, shot dead at a checkpoint. There are things that can be seen only with eyes that have cried, he said. And out of the intense pain and suffering and anger, Maggie found the courage to take risks and to innovate. And she was determined that death and evil would never have the last word because she innovated something new, which offered newness and hope, and because ultimately love wins. And it's important to remember that because I need to offer a postscript to Maggie's story and a new chapter, a sad postscript, but a positive new chapter. So in 2015, after the video you saw, President Pierre Nkurunziza, the president of Burundi, decided to run for a 3rd term. This plunged the country into crisis, thousands fled, hundreds were arrested, and many were killed. Maggie spoke out strongly against the unconstitutional 3rd term. She was targeted and she fled into exile into Rwanda, where she is still living and working. But the government shut down all the Maison Shalom programs in Burundi, including the schools and the hospital that you saw in Ruigi. They closed the bank accounts, they confiscated all the assets, and they also killed some of the children. These events obviously deepened Maggie's lament. So this is not a happily ever after story. And yet somehow it makes Maggie's story more real and more poignant for me, while also being tragic. Because we do what we can with the resources we have in front of us through the inspiration of God's Spirit, and we leave the rest to God. But her story is not over. She fled to Rwanda, where she now lives in exile, and she has started all over again. She has established a Maison Shalom for refugees there. And again, Katongole draws some intriguing lessons from her story. We've already noted that she was driven by love and compassion. She claims that love is our true identity, and that love is the most beautiful calling of human beings. We are created out of and to love. When she was in Burundi, the majority of children that she welcomed into Maison Shalom were orphans, street children, and former child soldiers. This reflects a profound theological belief that God's love is for all, but especially for the poor, the vulnerable, and the weak. Katongole affirms, if God's love invents a new social reality in history, that reality begins not in the centres of power, but at the margins of society, the overlooked and wounded individuals and communities. In situations of suffering and disaster, it is usually the poorer and more vulnerable communities that suffer the most. We know that. So what kind of inventiveness or innovation might lament and love drive us towards? What might it mean for us as we face the current issues that our world is facing? Or to take another example, as we face issues of climate change and experience grief over the future of our living planet. Maggie's grief over her situation turned her into an inventor, which she expressed through resistance, love, justice, and innovation. And then finally, let's think about lament as newness and hope. So as with Maggie, lament can lead to hope and innovation. Young theologian Hannah Malcolm writes, to lament, we must name the damage, express grief, act out restitution, and so access restoring forgiveness. Hope, like lament, becomes a way of being in the world. I love that. Hope, like lament, becomes a way of being in the world. Eco-psychologist, with the hilarious name of Michael Apathy, asserts that in order to deal with the climate crisis effectively, to take this as one example, and I think this applies more broadly, we need to do our own inner spiritual and psychological work, as well as the outer work of activism and making real systemic changes in the world. So we need to do both the inner and the outer work. Like Maggie, we need to innovate for justice and change. And it's important to connect with others in community to do this. So I want to share with you now quite a long, but I think worthwhile quotation from former Archbishop Rowan Williams, who writes powerfully on hope. And this is what he says about hope. Hope is a condition here and now, not a foretelling of what lies ahead, and certainly not an inoculation against loss, but the affirmation that God is bound to the finite reality that God loves, and it's God's business to honour that binding. Meanwhile, we keep ourselves open to the God who acts and speaks in the present, and we labour at whatever we can do to prevent catastrophe, even if we are fearful that all our effort is too late. We still celebrate the swallow in the moment. Anticipating loss can be a way of slipping away from a gift that is here and now. Without the celebration now, the loss would actually be softened in a strange way. The risk of loss gives the joy a kind of fierceness. So we've already noted that lament can have a surprising turn to praise. However, lament and praise are not simply juxtaposed. Rather, there can be an unexpected movement which brings about a fresh perspective and a new language. So this possibility of lament turning into praise, it reflects a transformation and innovation, a novelty that is only possible with the articulation of both pain and belief. So biblical lament, as we understand it, has the potential to bring us to a new place, to a new depth, to a new song of praise, which is qualitatively different from the praise that has gone before. It has a new quality about it, a new depth to it. It is a new kind of depth of knowledge and experience, only made possible by the experience of the suffering, the pain, the tears, the lament. It's a new kind of seeing, a kind of seeing emerging from pain, suffering, and anguish. There are things that can be seen only with eyes that have cried. And that's such an important insight, but that there is newness and hope after the pain, but it will be different and we will only arrive there because of the pain. So are we able in our contexts to begin to heal and bind the wounds, to stand in solidarity with the afflicted and the traumatized, to challenge injustice, and to innovate, to offer hope, and to bring about newness? So let me conclude with a poem from Denise Levertov. It's entitled Beginners. But we have only begun to love the earth. We have only begun to imagine the fullness of life. How could we tire of hope? So much is in bud. How can desire fail? We have only begun to imagine justice and mercy, only begun to envision how it might be to live as siblings with beast and flower, not as oppressors. Surely our river cannot already be hastening into the sea of non-being. Surely it cannot drag in the silt all that is innocent. Not yet, not yet. There is too much broken that must be mended, too much hurt we have done to each other that cannot yet be forgiven. We have only begun to know the power that is in us, if we would join our solitudes in the communion of struggle. So much is unfolding that must complete its gesture. So much is in bud. So thank you for listening. I hope you found that helpful. I'll now invite Paul Latham, who is a former student of ours, and we're going to have a brief conversation about his context and how he understands lament to work out in his context. We've already had the example of Maggie, which I think is an amazing example, but clearly quite dramatic and quite an extreme context. So I thought it'd be good to bring Paul on board to have a bit of a chat with him. He's local, and hear what he's doing and what he's up to. So Paul, welcome. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your context. And after we had a conversation with Paul, we'll have some time for Q&A.
Sounds like a marvellous idea. So I'm the Reverend Paul Latham. I'm a first year curate in Worcestershire Diocese, Church of England, and trained at CMS, as Cathy's already said. Context-wise, I've done a few, but for the last 4.5 years, I've been based in a place called Cradley Heath in the West Midlands, the heart of the West Midlands in the Black Country, working from a double-fronted shop in the middle of a high street.
Thanks, Paul. So tell us a little bit more about your community and what lament means for you in your context.
It's interesting. I mean, obviously, me and Cathy have spoken about this, but it's interesting sitting and looking and listening to the people of the community. And just listening to what Cathy's been saying earlier on, it was Psalm 142. And this resonates so much from people that come into the place, our project, if you want to call it by that name. And Psalm 142, the few lines, no one stands up for me. There is no refuge for me. No one cares about me. And nearly everybody that comes in sits with that. And trying to sit alongside people to listen to that, and then to try and unpick and work with it once it's been. And it was quite right. Different people picked out. Kathleen O'Connor came out about that. Open these to the air. So once somebody has then started to air that pain that they're feeling, then once it's been exposed, that we can see it, acknowledge it, not try and just cast it onto one side quite quickly, going, oh, well, if you go over and sit over there, this will all be solved. But sitting with it and working on a plan that will work for the future. But sitting with these people from a place of sympathy, empathy, it's a place where they can feel free to express that pain. We call it a safe, brave place that they can sit and discuss that with people. It's again, great things picking out of here today. Maggie in her video, so moving, talks about trying to get this one family together. So in Cradley Heath, we've got this whole mixture of people, different ages, different backgrounds all coming together as one family. And that's really interesting. As we found out, James Butler came up with the guys from Roehampton and looked at it. The big thing that they picked out was that people felt that they were part of a family, whether that was a little family that was working in our kitchen area, whether that was a little family working inside the food bank that we run, but all together part of a big family.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So a lot of what you're saying, I think, is resonating with what we saw of Maggie. So you're talking about allowing people the space and the safe context to be able to name the pain and sit with the pain, and also to be in community, to be in family. So you feel, and taking time over it. I imagine that this is not a quick fix.
No, it's not where somebody walks in and says, "I've got this problem. Do you sell Green Shield stamps?" That doesn't work. This is a case of allowing people to come in, even if it's just for a cup of tea, and then asking those really important questions. And how are you today? And I think the second really important question is, but how are you today? And then getting them, sometimes over that cup of tea, to come out with floods of stuff that they've been sitting on, that they've bottled up, that they've had nobody else to talk to or feel able to talk to, that we've become that safe place. And then slowly, slightly to unpick it.
So in some ways, I mean, compared to Maggie's context, which obviously is quite extreme, you've made it sound in some ways not that difficult, that it's about being alongside people, providing the space, listening to them. And I think when we talked before, one of the things you said that struck me was that you said lament is not a despair. It's not despairing. Can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people will with lament, and they're coming in, and it's the end. There's no hope. We can't see a future in this. I don't know why I'm here. And a great example of that the other day, we were lucky enough. We've got a new bishop in Worcester, Bishop Hugh, and he came to have a look at our ladies group that's running out of there, and to meet some of the volunteers. And one of the ladies in that group turned around and said, if it wasn't for the little ladies group that they got, that she didn't think that she would be here today. But she felt brave enough to come into that space to express how she felt. And she was sent by the local doctors, believe it or not, into that place just to come and sit with it. And Bishop Hugh, bless him, was there for about an hour. And his final comment was that this place feels like heaven on earth, where everyone is as one, and that they are all working together and supporting each other. And he took that into Deanery Synod later on in the evening and said exactly the same thing. And that was really moving to somebody that had not been in there before, but just in that hour had picked up on that closeness of the community that's running that. And it is the community that's running it, as much as it's Church of England, it's now run by the community for the community. And it's changing themselves.
I mean, that's lovely to hear that it's like heaven on earth. I mean, it really picks up what you just said, picks up so many of the themes of lament leading to newness and hope and innovation. And I mean, that's just lovely to hear that it's not at all about despair, but it is about leading to hope.
Yeah.
So perhaps we could just finish our conversation there, and there's now time, if you would like, to put questions in the chat or on the Q&A function. Joseph, our host, is going to monitor the questions and put them to Paul or me, and we'll be happy to try and answer them. We'll have a bit more conversation if you would like to. So, Joseph, we'll let you tell us the questions.
Thank you, Cathy. Thank you, Paul. That was very inspiring and very, very grounded. So thank you for that. We already have questions coming in, and remember, you can type your questions in the Q&A box, and we would take as many as we can within the time that we have left. The first question is from Donna. She says, my experience of lament, both as the one who carries the pain and loss and the one observing another's pain and loss, is that it is lonely. even within a strong, good marriage or friendship. Yes, a community may watch and wait alongside, but often it falls asleep or falls away as the painful journey prolongs. But I have noticed, she says, that the dreaming, innovating, and creating out of love requires a community effort. So here's the question. If some things can only be seen through eyes that have cried, how do we cast a vision to the community alongside to enable a community dreaming and innovation as a way forward? Because often as I've tried to innovate out of lament, I face further lament, she says, at the community's unperceiving things. And I can absolutely relate with Donna's question. Cathy, any thoughts for her?
Well, I was going to pass that question on to Paul. I mean, thank you, Donna. I think that's such a good question and a really powerful question, and clearly out of your lived experience, and I'm sure many other people have that as well. I will pass over to Paul, but one immediate response. I mean, I think, as you could see with Maggie, I mean, she experienced incredible lament and hardship and pain, and in fact, not to kind of glamorize or romanticize what went on with her, part of the killers were from her own family. So imagine living with that. That must make you feel incredibly isolated in one way from your immediate family. But as you can see in that Burundian context and the Rwandan context and in much of the majority world, it's a more community-oriented culture. I mean, you must experience that too, Joseph. So it's probably, perhaps it is easier. I can't really speak on behalf of those cultures, although I've lived among them, but perhaps it is easier to be in community in those cultures. But Paul, you've developed you just said the community run the show now. You've created a community context. How do people go from being individuals to be able to be in community? From being lonely individuals to in community?
Yeah, I think it's about walking alongside people. A lot of people, an awful lot of people, come into the context every month, and it's not as though we're standing at the doorway ushering people in. People come in, and then they come with their own questions of, why are you doing this? Why? What's going on? And of course, then that opens a great conversation about the Holy Spirit and about God, and about the way that we feel that we are walked next to, and enabling them to listen to those stories of the gospel and of the good news. And it is about walking alongside those people. Sometimes the stories are heartbreaking that we hear, and sometimes we can't go. I've got that experience. That's never happened to me. But it's about sitting and having that listening ear. Something I struggled with, and I resonate with Donna, is that we sit in it. One, you need to be surrounded by, and it sounds a bit pomp really, surrounded by positive people that have got some of the answers that we're looking for to help people to move forward. So whether that's mental health or drugs or alcohol or some of the other things that we come across. But the big thing in this for me was that I was carrying that, and I was carrying it home. Now, my wife's a nurse, 30 odd years. And I said, look, you deal with all these stories all the time. I've been here about 6 months. I'm really struggling carrying all this with me. How do I unload? Where do I pour this into? Where's the bucket to pour this into? And got a great response. And she says, it's really easy. It comes with experience. I said, I haven't got time for that. And I spoke to lots of clergy about it. And I said, how do you cope with all that? They went, it comes with experience. The big thing that I found, and it helps me, I'm not saying it works for everybody, but is in prayer. And I can get to the end of the day carrying so much. And I fell asleep in the armchair. I've had my tea and I'm going to bed. And it's just a case of sitting there going, I can't fix everything that I've come across today. And I offer all of this up in prayer to you. And I've got to admit, I have never slept so well in all my life from doing that. And the following morning, of course, is a new day, but prayer is paramount in all of this.
Thanks, Paul. And Donna, I just had another thought that I think it goes back to what I said at the beginning, and what Brueggemann and others have said, that the church is not very good at engaging with lament. or encouraging lament. And that's why Katongole wrote that book, actually, because he felt the African church was too triumphalistic and ignoring the pain and the lament and suffering that was going on in communities and in people's lives. So in terms of feeling lonely and how do you get people to engage with lament, it definitely starts with trying to encourage the church to actually practice lament, I think.
Thank you. Thank you, Cathy. Thank you, Paul. There's another question from Daphne. She says, how do we move through lament into trust and praise while remaining true to the heartache that we are facing? I feel stuck. I like the honesty of that.
I think it's hard, and I think it waxes and wanes. And some days you can be feeling like you've nailed it, and other days you're back in the slough of despair. So I think it is hard. I mean, Paul, I think it's prayer, as Paul said. I think it's community. I think it's clinging on to some of those promises in the Bible, trust. But I think it is hard. I honestly don't have any easy answer to that, Daphne. Paul, do you have any insights?
No, I think it's having that listening ear. You're right, Cathy. I've had a classic this morning. I've got a great friend now that I've known from the link for many years, doing really well, walking along beside him. He's been doing absolutely brilliant. And then I got a phone call this morning going, Paul, I've got so much in my bucket. It's really getting over full and I'm really struggling. But when I spoke to him last week, it was empty. He was quite happy to talk to other people and take stuff off them and take things off their lists. But I think it's trying to be aware of our own buckets and how much is in those, and realizing that the people that we're dealing with keep having things put into their buckets. It's not just one thing that they're coming with; it's a whole load of other stuff. And trying to unpick those and going little gains, little hopes. You know, we've done that. Let's now move on to the next bit, and keeping hold of that. I think that's important.
Thank you. We've got this other question from Sarah. Sarah is asking, where would you place reflection and discernment within like the 5 steps or aspects of lament, like complaint, request, etc., in that framework that you mentioned earlier on in the presentation? She said, I'm thinking about guarding against self-will being mistaken as God's will, justifying one's own agenda, that kind of thing.
Well, I think that reflection and discernment are possibly best done in community. That's why we need communities around us, so that people can help us remove the log from our eye or our own misconceptions. And I guess it also needs a pure and honest heart so that we really can face up to what is going on in our own lives and bring that to God and see where we need to repent and where we need healing and where we need to lament. So I think, reflection and discernment would be a key part of the whole process, I would think. Spiritual directors, prayer partners, spiritual leaders, spiritual friends, soul friends, I think can be an important part of that as well. Paul, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time it's that family that you're supporting, and the bigger family for you as well. So the spiritual directors are really important, and I appreciate lots of people don't have one of those. It's well worth having one, but trying to find positive people. We might want to explain at some point after this about some of the things that CMS are trying to do to reach out to other pioneers to give them that support network. About, we've got some great people joining there at the moment, and that's a great place to reflect and to talk amongst other people that are in a similar position.
Yeah, I think Paul's referring to the ecclesial community that we launched in September called Aspen. And one of the practices of that community is to have a kind of spiritual review with a mentor or a soul friend. I mean, if you want to know more about that, contact me. My email is on any of us, but my email was on the PowerPoint. We're very happy to explain more to you about that particular ecclesial dispersed community if you're interested, called Aspen.
Thank you, Cathy. It's not a question, it's a comment by one of the attendees on the Q&A box that says, we've been looking at listening prayer and facilitating conversations with Jesus and leaving these heavy matters at his feet. So I guess the person is offering their thoughts again in one of the ways that you can make that journey from lament to a place of trust and in a very beautiful way. There's another comment from someone on the chat that says, besides acknowledging Paul and say, nice to see you here, Paul, they said, praying in the same way is how I cope with holding lament and pain, and saying something like, God, I can't, I give it to you, and trusting that you can. And that seems to work for them as well. It's been a brilliant time together. Just before we wrap up, there's a final question I believe we'll have time for from Andy Moore. It says, you've said that the 5 stages of lament are healthy, but churches don't do them so much. What do you see as the typical pattern outside of the church as a response to pain and suffering? Are there some inspiring examples outside of the church in that sense? As a response to pain and suffering?
I mean, I think there are a lot of organisations outside the church that are responding to pain and suffering, and also within the church. But I think it's part of the human condition, isn't it? And there's organisations like Greenpeace. There's all sorts of environmental organisations. There are organisations that are helping out in Ukraine and in Sudan, and organisations, definitely outside the church, who want to see human flourishing and people to live well. I think what Katonga adds onto, and my disappointment, is that the church does these things, but the church doesn't seem to cope that well with lament and failure, perhaps. Failure is a different genre, but we always, I think, did you say it, Joseph? We always seem to have to be positive, but that's just not, life is not like that, and that is not the human condition. And we need to be fully rounded human beings that accept that it's not always going to be perfection. Mostly it won't, and honestly, the world is showing us that at the moment. So how do we deal with that, and how do we respond? And of course, community is so important. And the other thing that we really emphasize at CMS, and I've been reading quite a bit about recently, is diversity, how we need one another, our differences, diversity in all its manifestations, because that brings richness and challenge and opens our eyes to many other ways of thinking and behaving, believing and doing things.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much, Cathy. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and for those that stayed to the very, very end. If this conversation has resonated with you, if it's sparked something about mission, about theology, about serving God at the edges of the society, then we are persuaded that CMS Pioneer Mission Training might be a learning community that you would want to explore. And as we bring our time together to a close, I would just love to use the opportunity to invite you to one of our upcoming open days or open evenings. In other words, you could come in person to our place in Oxford at the CMS House. The next one will be on Tuesday, the 21st of April from 10:30 to 2 p.m. That's if in person you want to show up, but if you want to attend online from anywhere in the world, beyond the UK even, you can do that on Wednesday, 22nd of April from 7 p.m. UK time. That would be 7 p.m. British summer time to 8:30 p.m. In the evening. I'll drop a link. Oh, actually, the link is already in the chat, so you can use the link on the chat thread to go ahead and register for that. Thank you once again for joining us, and we hope to see some of you again sometime soon. We'll be having more and more webinars like this, so be on the lookout. If you subscribe to our newsletter, you will be able to be in the know when we have webinars like this coming on again. Thank you again, Cathy. Thank you, Paul, and thank you everyone.
Thanks, Jason.
It's been a beautiful.
Thank you, everyone.
God
Bye-bye.
bless. Bye.